symbolizing the fact that prayer could rise to God based upon a sacrifice for sin being made. The book of Hebrews says Jesus, by the sacrifice of himself, opened the way to God completely and finally. So the work of the golden altar essentially was opened by the work of the brazen altar. It was an altar where you sought mercy. In fact, in 1 Kings 1:50, it talks about people would literally cling to the horns of that altar, crying to God for mercy. It was an altar of mercy. It was an altar of grace based upon sacrifice. Once the sins had been atoned for, God could deliver the people from the consequence of their sin and show them mercy. But when you come to the book of Revelation, there is a dramatic change. We see the golden altar again in chapter 6. But it's not an altar of mercy. It's an altar of vengeance. It's an altar of vengeance. The saints are praying for vengeance on sinners. And now, in chapter 8, it becomes an altar of judgment. An altar of judgment where violence takes place as the angels throw down the censer and unleash the trumpet judgment. Just mark it. This is a horrible time in human history when the altar of mercy and the altar of grace has been turned into an altar of vengeance and an altar of judgment. Terrible. This is the end, when there's no more grace and there's no more mercy. The implication is that God's appointed way of salvation has been totally and finally rejected. The wickedness of the world has risen so high that even the place of mercy becomes a place of vengeance and a place of judgment. With that understanding, we come to verse 14. And the sixth angel who had the trumpet is told, release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. Now, who are these angels? Well, they're not holy angels, because nowhere in Scripture are holy angels ever bound, ever. These are fallen angels who are bound. We already met some like that in the first half of chapter 9, those who were bound in the time of Genesis and had been bound all the time since Genesis until the future tribulation, when, according to chapter 9, they are released. Well, here are some more of those bound demons. And the perfect tense in the Greek means they have been bound for a long time. That is their condition. Bound demons, fallen angels, another segment of Satan's force. And apparently each of these 4 bound demons has an army, because the armies that are with them in verse 16 are in the plural. Who are these, and what is the meaning of the river Euphrates? These are demons who have demon armies that have been bound, going all the way back to some ancient time around the river Euphrates. We know there are demons who have been free and worked throughout all of human history. We know there are demons who were thrown out of heaven. We know there are demons who, in chapter 9, as I said, came up out of the pit. But here is a new force of 200 million of them set loose. But why are they bound at the great river Euphrates? That seems like a very important note, and it is. Why are they bound in that place? Well, that is the area of the Garden of Eden. Of course, it was one of the 4 rivers of the Garden of Eden. So it was the place of Satan's deception of Adam and Eve. It was the place where Adam was tempted and fell, and the whole human race with him. It was the place where the first assault on God and man took place. The river Euphrates rises from sources near Mount Ararat in Turkey. The Euphrates flows more than 1,700 miles before emptying into the Persian Gulf, the longest and most important river in the Middle East. It figures prominently in the Old Testament, starting in Genesis chapter 2, as it was part of the topography of the Garden of Eden. It was near the Euphrates that sin began, that the first lie was told, that the first murder was committed, that the Tower of Babel was built, the complex of false religions that has since spread across the world. The Euphrates was the eastern boundary of the Promised Land, and Israel's influence extended to the Euphrates during the reign of David and Solomon. The region near Euphrates was also the central location of world powers, ancient world powers, Babylon, Assyria, and Medo-Persia. So it's a very important place. It could be that the demons who basically ran the empires of Assyria, Babylon, and Medo-Persia may have been bound at that time and have been bound along with their armies ever since then. It is the river Euphrates again over which the enemies of God will cross in the future when they engage in the battle of Armageddon. So it's like the focal point of all evil. And God bound some demons and held them in captivity there until this future time, along with their army of 200 million. As bad as the world is, it's not as bad as it could be if 200 million more demons were set loose. Just think of that. It's right at the place where the Tower of Babel initiated pagan religion. The very place where pagan religion today is still headquartered. What do I mean by that? The Middle East is still the home, and going east from there, of the major false religions of the world. Islam, Hinduism, Sikhism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, Shinto, shamanism, animism, on and on and on and on you go. It's still the focal point of Satan's counterfeit religions.